Welcome back to Sharpen the Point. We continue our look at the ACC, breaking down what each team is losing, returning, and bringing in for next season while we are wrapping up spring practices. And today we take a look at two likely title contenders in Louisville and Miami, while also covering a North Carolina team that continues to overhaul its roster under the guidance of Bill Belichick. Starting out with the Brohm brothers at Louisville. They got this thing kind of humming over here. Miller Moss was a disappointment. I would say that's fair to argue. Definitely the first miss, more than likely, in the Brohm era back at Louisville. Jack Plummer was ups and downs, but Moss kind of got replaced to an extent. Deuce Adams wasn't really the long term answer here. So they went out and made a nice splash in the portal, getting Lincoln Kienholz. Kienholz was allegedly battling Julian Sayin for the Ohio State job last year, heading into it. Had looked pretty solid. I think that's a very astute pickup and a guy that can lead this offense, no doubt about it. It'll be interesting to see what they kind of have behind him should they need him. Hopefully they don't. Briggs Cherry being the prized recruit that potentially has some long-term upside, and then Davin Widener providing just some depth, protection behind Kienholz over here. The key to this room and the key to this offense has been they had a three-headed monster last year. Ultimately, the key is going to end up being the health. Isaac Brown is, for my money, one of the better backs in the country. A guy that was healthy early in the season. We saw him against that James Madison defense rip off the 70-something yard run late in the game. He has this explosive ability that few backs possess, but also a reasonable size projection. A guy that is capable in every facet of the game. They're going to probably try to split work and keep some of the load off of him because Kewan Brown is talented as well. But Isaac Brown's the star of the show for my money, and a guy that I think, if healthy for the entire season, could put up a 1,200, 1,400, 1,500 yard season. And they do lose the depth piece that is Duke Watson. He was kind of relegated to that third spot, never was really going to be able to get in front of the Brown pairing. But they do replace them and add some depth with Cole Tabb out of Stanford, who is fine. He's a decent little pass catcher, runs the ball okay, but he's just a depth piece. Marquise Davis from Missouri, he was landlocked behind too much there, and he's a capable player as well. Not necessarily a guy that I think cracks that top two, but a guy that could easily take on some of that Duke Watson work that has departed the building. Wide receiver wise, we know in a Brohm system, the top outside receiver is more than likely to be your top target earner. We saw it with Ja'Cory Brooks originally when he came in. Chris Bell assumed that role with over 100 targets last year. Colin Lacey never quite realized the Rondale Moore aspect that I thought he could, but still solid seasons out of them with high target earning potential. They do operate under a very tight target tree. I'm a huge fan returning wise of Trayshawn Hurry. He's a guy that I think has big upside. He has the capability to be a Chris Bell. Do I think he gets the opportunity? Probably not, given what they added. I'm hoping he operates as the two. I'm a big fan there. So I think he gets on the field at worst as the three, but I hope he plays a lot, and I think he's talented enough to take that next step. They do bring in Trey Richardson, which I think ends up being their Rondale Moore and their top target earner. He has coming off a very good year at Vanderbilt. He did split some time there. Kind of questionable as to why he would leave Vandy in that situation with Jared Curtis coming in. Kind of an interesting situation there with him having an 800-yard, 7-touchdown year. High average depth of target. It's just kind of telling me that I think he takes on that Bell Brooks role as the top guy. He's the guy I'm going to buy into early in the season. LaWayne McCoy comes over from Florida State. think he'll have a role as well, potentially supplanting Hurry as the top guy. But I think Richardson, McCoy are likely to be more higher end, with Jackson Voth mixing in potentially as well. Wide receiver wise, they're still in good shape, though. This offense does well highlighting specifically a top guy, and they have the one in Trey Richardson. Tight end wise, they haven't really utilized the position too much, but Jaleel Skinner likely to reprise that role, if not expand upon it a little bit, given that Kuriski has left and gone to Duke. Questionable decision out of Kuriski there. I don't think he's going to end up with a huge role with the Blue Devils either, but they did bring in some depth with Brody Foley out of Tulsa and Justin Reed out of Tulane, giving him some backup help, given the senior leadership or the late, elder statesmen that they had lost in the room. Offensive line is going to be where the $1 million question is, right? Lose all 5 starters, only one of which is not to graduation. Jordan Church gets bought by Texas Tech, aka the highest bidder. So now they need to figure out and go back to the drawing board as to who is going to take these spots. Nair Jackson has some capability coming over originally from FIU a year ago. Cameron Gorin, he kind of built on a true freshman season. That's your top returners, but they hit the portal extremely hard, and I think they're going to end up filling from those spots, with Kason Henry being a top option at a tackle position out of South Carolina, Evan Wibberly, center out of Kentucky, Eric Doherty out of Boston College, likely to get a guard role, Johnny Brown and Anwar O'Neal coming over from Delaware and Georgia Southern, respectively, are experienced guys that all should be able to crack around that rotation. And if not, they'll provide a little bit of depth. But some guys that are more than capable, and I'm big on kicking a tackle into guard, specifically when they level up from a G5 to a P4. So that should work out fairly well. Defensively, they have some building block. This defense was great a year ago, and they've got some hell of a building blocks off of the edge. Now, they do lose a ton out of this room. Defensive tackle-wise is probably my biggest question mark as to how they're going to operate. Did bring in a transfer in Joshua Donald out of Houston and Tommy Ziesmer. Maybe those guys are end up in the top end of the rotation. I am slightly worried about the defensive tackle spots, but I don't think there's anything to worry about off of the edge because they have some studs. Clev Lubin hit the ground running with a double-digit sack season out of Coastal Carolina, pairing him up with an AJ Green, who's rangy as well, and Tyler Thompson being a great pickup out of North Carolina off of a 7-sack season, gives them a ton of pass rush capability. So if this team gets out to a lead, you're going to be in deep trouble with guys flying off the edge. It just comes down to if they have enough in the middle of the park here to be able to hold up against the run. That it remains to be seen. That's how I would end up picking on them. That defensive edge is going to be able to hide or mask some of those secondary deficiencies that we'll talk about in a bit. Linebacker wise, do lose 2 top guys in TJ Quinn and Caleb Perry, but they seem pretty happy with what they have, bringing back Antonio Watts, TJ Capers, and Stanquan Clark, given that they did not manage to go out and bother to add much to the room outside of their commitments, which they did a really nice job recruiting in that area. I think they're still stout in the linebacker room. Nothing too much to worry about there. And then defensive back wise, it was a who's who leaving the room. Notably, Jamari Mack, one of the better corners in the conference, along with the safety tandem. Tayon Holloway returns, though, as he'll reprise and be the top corner in the room. And then they added a ton out of the portal. I think it's going to be big for them with Ettringer from Southern Miss being the top guy at corner. Caleb Beasley and Ben Perry from Tennessee and UCLA are likely to end up needing to be thrust into a safety role probably right away. DJ Waller is an upside pickup. Hasn't really. He's going to end up being a depth piece. I think Bryson Scott is a guy that we're going to want to keep an eye on out of Elon that can emerge. He's had a good amount of playing time early in his career with the Phoenix, played fairly decently. It is a step up in competition, but keeping an eye on that will be important. Overall, though, I think this is a team that is going to be able to get after the passer in the right game scripts. We'll have to wait and kind of judge the back end early. As long as they're getting after the quarterback, it should mask some of that deficiency. I do worry a little about the run game, specifically in the A and B gaps early in the season that this defense is going to have to face on. But they should be able to throw the football around fairly well. There's a talented set, and I think Lincoln Kienholz was a quality replacement and or upgrade. So off of a 9-3 season, it'll be interesting to see what their schedule looks like. They are a perennial contender for a reason. Moving on to what is likely the team that I lost the most money betting against a year ago, mainly the Notre Dame game and later on, specifically the national title game that they didn't quite get blown enough out in for my liking. Look, I just wasn't a Carson Beck believer. He played fine. He played very well, relatively speaking. I would argue they upgraded from Beck to Mensah. I just don't think Beck's that great. I think Mensah is very talented. So Mensah comes in from Duke. They bought him late. There's a lot behind it. Mensah is mobile enough, similar to Carson Beck, but he doesn't really move around a ton. He put up monster numbers, but it was basically because they were having to chuck late in games because they got behind a little bit here and there. I thought Duke's defense wasn't as good as we would have expected them to be, but the kid's uber talented. He doesn't put the ball in bad positions. He throws the ball extremely well, and they brought his duo mate with him. We're going to get to him in a second, but overall, Mensah is a stud, and no doubt about it. He's got plenty of Cam Ward to him with the arm talent is through the roof, and he's experienced as can be. This running back room is absolutely stacked and moderately surprising that they were able to keep it together. Mark Fletcher might be the most underrated back in the country because he came off of the injury. He came back slow. He didn't quite get all the way back, and we really didn't see it till the very end of last year. But his close to the season tells me he's fully healthy. He's fully a go. And I would buy into the fact that he's going to have an absolute monster of a season here. I think Shamar Brown did a yeoman's job with what the role he was given, and he surpassed and kind of did more than I expected to an extent off of that monster freshman season at North Dakota State. I think he continues to build. Him and Pringle are probably going to end up in a split once Fletcher departs, but this is the Fletcher show. Brown and Pringle are just going to be there to keep him healthy. Jordan Lyle's fallen off the depth chart for my money, and I think Lyle ends up transferring eventually. But Brown, Pringle as the 2 and 3, they showed plenty of flash last year to say that they're going to be quality backs in the future. But this needs to be the Fletcher show. Anytime that a game's close, they should rely on Fletcher heavily. He is I think he picks up where he left off a year ago and just has an unreal good season. Specifically, that playoff stretch was unbelievably good. Wide receiver wise, lose Keelan Marion. I did rely on him every once in a while in DFS as a cheap option, being able to make some big plays. Lose CJ Daniels, who we all kind of know if you've watched anything that I'm not a CJ Daniels guy. I don't think he's been particularly good or effective since Liberty. And yeah, he had a few multi-touchdown games, but outside of that, it was nothing. Josiah Trader never lived up to what we expected. So no shock that he bolted to NC State. And Josh Moore, I think, slots in as probably the 3, maybe the 4 in this offense. Notice I haven't talked about Malachi Tony yet. Malachi Tony is very good. Love that we just saw. I was watching the Bussin' with the Boys. Shout out them. No free shout outs. I was watching their video of spring practice with Tony coming in at 5:30 every morning, catching balls on the jugs machine. His hands are unquestioned. He makes great plays. He's able to run the football. He's able to throw the football. He's able to catch the football. The kid's a stud. Don't get me wrong. I will say, I think we all, the general public, believe that he is Tyreek Hill. I don't think he has the track speed. I saw too many instances a year ago where he got caught in situations that I thought he would pull away. Specifically, the punt return against, I want to say it was A&M. It was in a playoff game. And the Florida State game, I believe he caught one. I thought he was going to kind of take off. It was either Florida State or SMU. I thought he would take off, and he didn't quite do that. But he's going to catch an insane amount of passes. And he should, and he's going to rack up yardage. And there's plenty of guys that can't catch him. I do wonder how he translates to the next level. I'm hoping he gets a little bit more speed. I'll be interested to see what he times at once we get to his combine stuff. I think he's fast. I think his 10-yard split is really good. I think his 3-cone is really good. I wonder what his start-stop is. That is something that, you look at like a guy like an Emmanuel Sanders or an Antonio Brown, not necessarily the long speed guys, but they're really quick in and out of start-stop, right? Their explosive ability in that first 10 and to stop and keep going is what made the difference as far as them being a highly talented player in the long run. So I think your 3-cone, your 5-10-5, like those types of things, I think he excels at. Whereas I think his 40 necessarily isn't quite what we think it is as an average viewer, which I think is interesting in the long run. I got to talk about my guy. For my money, Cooper Barkate is a massive upgrade. I don't think enough people talked about him coming into the season last year. I was heavy Cooper Barkate coming over from the Ivy League. I believe it was Harvard, came over. He was a 4-star, went to Harvard, smart guy. He's all about the studies and making sure he gets degrees and all that stuff. Goes to Duke, has the monster season with Mensa, translates, comes up. This is an NFL pick all day, every day. The kid is a star, and he's got the opportunity. A 1,000-yard season with Mensa a year ago. Should have likely been double-digit touchdowns, wasn't, but 100-plus targets. I think we see a very tight target tree with Barkate and Tony, and it's going to create – Malachi Tony's just going to create an immense amount of space for Cooper Barkate to operate, and then if teams adjust to Barkate, then Tony's going to have an immense amount of space to operate. Barkate gives you that downfield threat that Marion and Daniels didn't necessarily present because Barkate can win at all levels. Whereas Marion kind of is the track speed guy. Daniels is your 10-yard hitch jump ball guy. That combination is unbelievably good. Cam Vaughn is just a wind sprinter. I don't know that he beats Joshua Moore out. I think Vondravius Jacobs coming over from South Carolina, also more of a wind sprinter. They're interchangeable, both of them. I think they see the field, but they're not anything more than wind sprinters with the volume going to Barkate and Tony. They'll have some games here or there where they catch the wind sprint pass, but other than that, nothing crazy between them. Tight end wise, Elijah Lofton returns, an absolute stud as well. I think he'll get more utilized underneath Darian Mensah, who was able to utilize his tight ends. The offense doesn't necessarily placate to using the tight end, but I think more of Alex Bauman's targets end up flowing to Lofton. And then we see some of these younger guys like a Luka Gilbert see an advanced role potentially, but most of the work should flow through Lofton after the top two in the wide receiver room, even though they're going to soak up 200 targets more than likely. Offensive line wise, this was probably the best unit in the country. I think it's kind of hard not to say that. I think coming into the year, we kind of felt it was Miami and Utah. Utah performed very well, especially down the stretch, was just an absolutely insane unit. They do lose 4 out of the 5 starters, with Matthew McCoy being the only one returning, but these are hard guys to replace. But they have recruited so well along the line of scrimmage and brought in guys. I don't know that you should be very concerned. There is very few teams in this country that have had a Samson Akinlolo sitting there that they can utilize, a Max Buchanan that you can develop and utilize. So you can plug those two anywhere you want, and they are studs. And honestly, the biggest one of them all, for my money, is Jackson Cantwell. I think he was the star of the clips and the things that we saw, and a guy that can hit the ground running, and a guy that should be a first-round pick in 3 years. You'll be hard-pressed to find another guy that looks that good that early in spring practice, in his first spring, already right out the gate. I think this kid's only going to get better. Iron sharpens iron. They recruit the lines extremely well, and then they're playing against one another, and it's only going to develop them more. So I think everybody needs to keep an eye on Jackson Cantwell coming into the season and watch him. And I think he'll be a guy who performs unreal. Former JMU defensive coordinator, now Miami defensive coordinator, Corey Heatherman, who had been there previously. The man is insane, and in a good way. Now, he's going to lose a lot, but similarly to the offensive line, they recruit so well along this defense, and they're able to go out and spend on some of these guys. Yes, Ruben Bain, the fire hydrant, is now gone. Akeem Mesidor, gone. Both superstars, no doubt about it. David Blay, very good player. But you can sit there with a Justin Scott and Ahmad Moten in the middle, clogging up everything. Combine that with an Armando Blunt and Marquise Lightfoot on the outside that will just step right into those roles. And then add what arguably was the best pass rusher in the SEC a year ago in Damon Wilson, which Georgia is immensely regretting letting go at this point after the year he had at Missouri. And you've got just this nutty trio of superstar talent on the outside, and it just continues. The depth is insane. Keona Davis from Nebraska is a nasty defensive tackle to pair into that rotation. So they've got plenty of bodies along this defensive line and plenty of depth along this defensive line for it to excel and just rinse and repeat what they had a year ago. And given what they're going to face in the ACC, they kind of get to grow throughout the season and get their footing together, and then hopefully make a run in the playoff. Linebacker-wise, a ton of turnover. Wesley Bissanth, extremely, seasoned vet. Muhammad Toure, seasoned vet. Aguirre, vet. Like you got all these guys that Aguirre now transferring out though. Chase Smith. But still, you bring in an Omar Thornton from BC, who talented player. I think the most question marks will be in this linebacking room coming into the season. How does it develop? Can a Cam Pruitt take that next step? Can a Kamal Bonner take a step? They're going to need some step-up guys here. It's not necessarily the replenish, reload with the depth situation that with the high end guys that the defensive line has. But the fact that that defensive line is going to create havoc is going to take a lot of pressure in the run game off of the linebacking unit, and the capability of that defense of Heatherman to be able to put guys in good positions will make up a lot for any deficiency at the second level. Defensive back wise, keep a ton. Keep a ton in the room. Jacoby Thomas gone, but he was a seasoned vet. Keontae Scott, seasoned vet. But you bring back a Poyser, you bring back a Xavier Lucas. Xavier Lucas, very good corner. Very good corner. There's a reason why Wisconsin was so mad about that situation. Can OJ Federic take that next step? Can an Ethan O'Connor, a Damari Brown take those steps forward? Potentially. But I think they're so deep at corner and so talented there that the competition alone, you get a Bryce Fitzgerald paired with a Poyser at safety. You know, safeties, nickels. You add a Conrad Hussey as a nickel, potentially a nickel option. Just an absolutely loaded secondary. So I have less concern with the linebacking unit, given how good the defensive back room and the defensive front are. And you pair that with what I believe to be a quarterback upgrade, what I believe to be a second wide receiver upgrade. I think it's a 1A, 1B situation. Yes, there's moderate concern along the offensive line, but the running back room is so good, and they're going to have time to gel given what they end up facing throughout the season. You're hard-pressed to think that this shouldn't be a playoff team, without a doubt. Moving on to Bill Belichick and the North Carolina Tar Heels off of what was a interesting season, to say the least, and we get Bobby Petrino. I don't know how that marriage is going to work. I'm guessing Bill's just going to let him do his thing. I had higher hopes for Gio Lopez. He got banged up a few times. Wake Forest bound he is now. I think he fits great in that system at Wake Forest. Look forward to talking about that. Billy Edwards, a guy that I had high hopes for coming out of Maryland, although he went to Wisconsin, which was an awful situation. He fits the mold of a Petrino quarterback. He's got good mobility. He throws the ball fairly well. Do I think he's an upgrade? A little. Gio had too many other issues around him, but Billy Edwards has to stay healthy. And Billy Edwards has not stayed healthy. So if Billy Edwards doesn't stay healthy, they're in deep stuff. Running back wise, Damon June, likely the top guy for my money. Davion Goss had some decent play and decent reps here. They were just on a full-on search in this backfield to find a guy who could play at various points of the season, and it felt like June ended up taking on that role and being the guy, which forced Gauze out the room. They do bring in Caleb Jackson, likely as a depth piece. Honestly, I've seen enough Caleb Jackson at LSU to know Caleb Jackson ain't it. I personally think this is the Demon June backfield, and they just need to lean into it. I know he's like to mix and match guys, but he will lean into a guy like a Lawrence Maroney, LeGarrette Blount, Stephen Ridley. June fits that mold. I think he's going to end up relying on June with Ben Hall, Caleb Jackson kind of mixing in here and there. Wide receiver wise, finally, Kobe Paysour is now gone. It felt like it was a year too long, maybe two. But Jordan Shipp is the clear top option in the room. Very talented for my money. I like Jordan Shipp, and I like his upside. I almost wish he would have transferred to get an opportunity at a bigger school. But he's going to end up pairing up with Trech Kekahuna, who comes over with Billy Edwards from Wisconsin. Kekahuna, solid player, but not somebody that I would personally buy into being a difference maker at any point. I think Shipp is the 1A, B, and C, probably the 1 and the 2. He should push for 100 targets in this offense overall, and then they're going to have some question marks outside of that. Tight end wise, Jake Johnson was fine. Catch a touchdown from his brother, but I don't like these tight ends. I'll be honest. I'm not a big fan of them. They kind of had an exodus here. You thought they would utilize the tight end a little more than they did, given the what they've done previously in previous stops. Jelani Thurman from Ohio State. There's some pedigree there, but not exactly great. Jackson Warren, thought he played okay as kind of spelling Rocky Beers here and there at Colorado State. None of these guys stand out to me as guys that I'm looking at for real addition. I think it's the Jordan Ship show. I think it's the Damon June show. Those are probably the guys that I'm going to end up looking to as the playable options in this offense. Offensive line wise, they're all gone. They weren't amazing. They weren't terrible either. Miles McVay moving on to Mississippi State continues his jump around situation. I think Aiden Banfield probably steps right into a starting role. Jordan Hall likely steps into a starting role. Excuse me. Shaq McRoy coming over from Arkansas, more than likely to get somewhere. Andrew Threet, Charleston Southern, I believe, likely to step into a starting role as well. They're going to need some of these younger guys and transfers to kick inside as well to fill out this offensive line unit. Not exactly super enthused with what's there overall. I'm kind of worried for the health of Billy Edwards now that I look at this. I'm interested. We're going to do win totals here in the next month or so. Slightly concerned. I'll be honest. I think Ship is like the one guy, and maybe June here and there. Defensively, Steve Belichick, under that guidance, it wasn't a terrible unit. Did a good job getting after the passer. They did lose some guys, which is a concern. You lose a Dontre Robinson, lose a CJ Mims. They do manage to keep the key piece to the unit, which is Melkart Abu Jaude. That is a rangy defensive end that can press the edge and defend the run. That's going to help. Keeping an Isaiah Johnson in the middle, also very much so going to help. Adding Jalen Harvey gives you a little bit of edge upside out of Penn State. And then it's going to kind of come down to how they recruited to an extent. I think recruiting is going to end up being the thing that makes or breaks the defense. How do they learn the system? They're going to be able to get after the passer fairly well, but are they going to be in situations where they need to get after the passer? That's the $1 million question, right? It's good to have a good pass rusher. Helps. But does it help if you're getting slaughtered because the offense can't get off the field or can't score? It's going to be a problem to an extent. Linebacker-wise, more turnover. Outside of bringing back Greg Smith, it's a lot of guys that they're going to need to rely on right out of the way. Peyton Seelman being the main one coming over. He's going to end up having to slot right in to a prominent role. And then it's Greg Smith and Peyton Seelman. Because Kamari House gone, Andrew Simpson gone, Tyler Thompson all gone. Tyler Thompson being a big loss. Moving over to Louisville, mentioned him in that discussion just a little bit ago. I think you're looking at Seelman and Smith, and then dealer's choice as to who ends up getting some run here after them. That's going to be problematic potentially. Defensive back wise, they had a good unit a year ago to an extent. Not necessarily the best ball hawking unit, but guys that were able to keep it in range. Caleb Cost being the main returner, Jaden Patterson. Outside of that, some lightly or used guys that they're going to need to step up. I think they're going to end up turning to some of these commits. Denton Dobson being the top one at cornerback. I just think this is going to end up being a very long season. And the question becomes, you know, does Bill decide this is the end? That that could very well be the situation by the time we get to the end of this thing. Because how long does he want to go with this? Um, if it continues bad, and I think we're one. I mean, best case scenario, Billy Edwards stays healthy, but betting on that is probably a fool's errand, to be fair.